Cairo never truly slept. Even at midnight the city pulsed, neon signs and headlights bleeding across narrow streets like veins of restless light. Beyond the modern sprawl, the pyramids of Giza rose against the night sky, dark silhouettes of impossible age. Ulric U.S. Stone sat in the back of a dusty jeep as it rattled toward the Khafre complex. He checked the cracked face of his pocket watch. The second hand spun too fast, then froze, then lurched forward again. Hannah Varga, sitting beside him, noticed his hand tighten around the watch. "You're shaking," she said softly. Her Hungarian accent curled around the English words. "Are you sure you should be here, Ulric? After Rome?" He cut her off with a thin smile. "After Rome, I don't get to choose. The Custodian isn't finished. And if I sit still, I lose the trail." The jeep halted near a floodlit excavation tent. Archaeologists moved like ants, carrying tools, brushing dust from limestone blocks, murmuring in Arabic and English. The air smelled of sweat, diesel, and desert. Hannah grabbed a lantern and led him toward a half-exposed wall deep under the pyramid's flank. Fresh carvings gleamed beneath centuries of grit. She bent low, tracing a line with her gloved hand. "Look," she whispered. "Not Horus, not Ra. This is different." The carving showed an eye wide open, its iris etched in shadow strokes, as if staring from within darkness itself. "They called it Ujat Akhenaten," Hannah explained. "The eye of Akhenaten, open in night. It doesn't appear in any canon texts. It's distorted, like a god reinvented." U.S. stepped closer, the lantern light catching his cheekbones. In his palm, the watch pulsed with irregular life. The tick no longer kept rhythm, but throbbed like a heartbeat. He knew the signs. Hannah noticed his change in color. "Ulric, don't..." Too late. He pressed his fingertips against the carving. The stone convulsed under his touch. A vibration surged up his arm, into his chest, rattling his teeth. The lantern went out. And then, the world collapsed. Sand exploded upward, swallowing everything. The floodlights, the tents, Hannah's voice, all vanished in a single breath. U.S. was hurled into a storm, a maelstrom of crimson grains that tore across his skin like knives. He tried to shield his face, but the wind ripped at his clothes, howling like an animal. The watch in his fist quivered violently. The hands spun backward, then forward. Faster and faster until time itself blurred. Through the roar came voices, whispers in dozens of tongues, layered on top of one another. Greek, Coptic, ancient Egyptian, something older than them all. He could not understand the words individually, but together they merged into a single chant. Aten, Aten, the eternal sun. The sand thickened, filling his throat, his ears, his lungs. He stumbled, fell, rolled across shifting dunes that weren't dunes at all, but currents of memory, dragging him down. He gasped. When his eyes opened again, the storm was gone. He lay on a paved road of limestone blocks. Around him stretched a city, wide avenues, whitewashed houses, courtyards brimming with lotus pools. The Nile shimmered in the distance under a brutal glare. Above, the sun burned like a polished disk of copper. It wasn't right. Its light felt heavier, as though it pressed against his shoulders. It pulsed faintly, like a machine. Figures walked past him, men in linen kilts, women with braided hair and amulets of gold. They carried baskets of fruit, clay jars, bouquets of blue lotus. Their eyes slid over U.S. with unease. "Foreign," one muttered in Egyptian, though U.S. somehow understood. "He bears no mark of Aten." A shiver ran through him. His watch ticked faintly, an anchor, A reminder this was a dream layer. But how deep was he? He staggered to his feet and followed the crowd, trying to absorb the enormity of what he saw. This was Amarna, the fabled city built by Pharaoh Akhenaten for his singular god Aten. A city erased by time, its ruins swallowed by desert centuries ago. Yet here it was, alive, bustling, breathing. He whispered to himself, almost laughing in disbelief, "I've dropped straight into the heretic king's dream." The air smelled of incense and hot stone. Musicians played reed flutes near a market square. Children chased each other, but their laughter seemed brittle, strained. And everywhere, the disk of Aten blazed from banners, walls, and stelae, a relentless eye watching all. US knew then, this was no ordinary dreamscape. The Custodian had been here, and the bargain of memory had already begun. Amarna spread like a proclamation along the river. Its avenues were too straight, its plazas too clean, as if an idea had been poured over the land and allowed to harden. Everywhere the Aten disk stared, painted on pylons, chiseled into lintels, hammered into copper medallions nailed to doors. Hands at the ends of its rays held ankhs to lips of kings, queens, children. The gesture looked tender, until you noticed how identical each hand was, like copies of a copy. US walked with the crowd and tried not to look like a man who had fallen out of the wrong century. A woman drew her toddler close when his shadow touched the boy's bare feet. Two scribes hunched by a wall with chisels, carefully scraping a name out of a cartouche and smoothing the hollow with wet sand. Dust from the erasure lifted and drifted away. The way a story leaves a room and no one remembers to ask where it went. He cut down a side lane, smelling of crushed mint and clay. In a doorway, a little girl had drawn a jackal-headed figure in the dust with a stick, ears sharp, nose proud. Her mother hissed and wiped it away with her heel, so quickly her ankle bones flashed. The girl's mouth formed a question. The mother shook her head once, hard, not aloud. US's watch ticked once in his palm, the tiniest reassurance that the rules he knew hadn't abandoned him entirely. He lifted the lid, saw the hands nailed to 1147, and shut it again. Somewhere far above this layer, in a fluorescent world shaped by permits and headlamps, Hana would be checking her time and waiting for his reply. A shadow detached itself from a colonnade and became a man. He wore linen, yes, but his robe was too plain for an Aten official, no sun medallions, no smug geometry, and his staff's finial was a black disk that swallowed light instead of bending it. His face was the kind that could fade into any crowd, and because of that, watched all crowds without being watched back. "You walk unmarked," he said, in Egyptian, that US heard cleanly in English, because the dream preferred its jokes to be understood. "You look at walls as if you could make them tell you where they were before they were walls." "Bad habit," US said. "It's a courage," the man replied. "Courage and foolishness share a tent." He dipped his head. "I am Mena. We are called listeners." "To what?" US asked. "To what the king has forgotten," Mena said, and smiled without joy. "Come." He did not reach for US. He simply turned and walked. US followed because he had learned to trust people who didn't try to drag him anywhere. Mena led him through a corridor where sunlight slatted the floor, along a garden wall hung with grapevines, then into the cool belly of a temple, whose very shadow seemed measured and smoothed. Inside, sound changed. Chants from the outer court became a low braid of noise. The floor's stone cooled his soles through his boots. On either side, painted scenes showed the royal family worshipping Aten. Akhenaten long-faced and delicate, Nefertiti erect and fierce, daughters laughing under the sun's little hands. The paintings were alive in a way museum walls never are. Brush strokes vibrated with the speed of a human wrist. Mena stopped before a threshold barred by a rope. A pair of young priests stood guard. Eyes glazed, the way people's eyes get when they've been told not to see anything they haven't been given permission to see. Mena lifted his staff a fraction. The younger priest blinked, looked down at his own sandals as if they'd asked an interesting question, and stepped aside. The other followed, delayed and obedient. Convenient, US said. Faith is heavy, Mena said. If you nudge it at the hinge, it swings. They entered a sanctum where heat and cool nested like twins. The chamber was circular. In its center stood a disk taller than any man, not solid gold, but hammered metal, with a skin that drank and gave light in equal measure. From its rim radiated rods, crystal, stone, tubes of a substance that had learned to pretend to be both. They connected to points in the floor where slender channels ran like veins, branching and rejoining in a geometry that made US's skin itch with recognition. The solar resonator. It wasn't bright, the way lamps are bright. It was the kind of brightness you feel on the inside of your eyelids. Air moved in the room without a visible source, the way breath moves in a sleeping chest. Somewhere, something hummed, not loud, but fundamental, the note on which a choir builds harmonies. US circled the disc slowly. The channels in the floor weren't decoration, they were ducts. He crouched, rubbed a finger across one's edge, held it to his nose, smelled stone, a whisper of oil, the least hint of something metallic. He looked at the rods, angles set to bite light, to bend it, to coax heat to go where heat didn't want to go. It was not a god. It was a design, tied to earth, tuned to a sky, powered by knowledge so old it had forgotten to have a patent. It breathes for the city, Mena said quietly, standing with his head bowed, as if even truth wanted the courtesy of lowered eyes. When the wind is wrong, the chambers below pull it straight. When the heat pounds, the stone drinks and gives back cool. In some rooms, night shines where day cannot reach. Who built it? US asked. The king will say Aten gave it, Mena said. The king's enemies will say demons. We say men. Men who counted and listened and learned that stone has lungs if you tell it where to put them. He cast US a glance. We also say no man builds a thing like this alone. The plan is older than the king, older than cities. US rested his palm on the air, an inch away from a rod, and felt the hair on his arm lift. The Ignis engine had hummed like this before it sang. He could map, in his head, where the air wanted to go, where the heat bled into ground, where light got trapped and taught to fold itself back. Do you hear it? Mena asked. The tone, US said. The whisper, Mena said, and now his mouth tightened. Not from the disk, from behind the disk, the one who keeps and asks to keep more. US listened, not with ears. A pressure at the back of the skull, like standing under a waterfall you can't see. A word that is not a word pressing on language, until language breaks open around it. Yes, US said. Mena's knuckles went white on his staff. He came in dreams first, then walked these rooms like a scribe with no sand on his sandals. He offers light that never tires. He asks for songs that never tire of being sung. He says the old names were a burden. He says new is clean. US straightened. And the king? He is a man, Mena said, which was both answer and refusal. He would draw a straight line through crooked time. He wants the future to arrive in one piece. He believes the cost is his to pay. What cost? US asked, though he knew. Mena gestured toward a side passage. Come. They stepped into a narrow hall where the air cooled another degree. The walls here were not painted. They were carved, detailed not for eyes, but for fingers, as if the carvers had known a day would come when seeing would be dangerous, and touching would be all that remained. Shelves held bundles wrapped in linen string. Mena undid one and let it fall open. Inside lay small idols, a falcon with its beak blunted, a lotus whose petals had been planed until they were almost flat, a jackal's head rubbed until the ears barely rose from the wood. Each had been erased without being destroyed. Confiscated from homes, Mena said, from niches in walls, from under pillows. They are not burned. He will not be seen to burn. He will simply make them nothing. He repacked the bundle and tied it shut again. Forgetting is the cleanest of all fires. US felt his jaw set. I've seen his kind of clean. A low procession of Aten priests drifted past the hall's far end. Bare feet, clean-shaven heads, eyes glazed with the relief of certainty. Their chant lapped the walls. As they passed the Resonator's doorway, the tone in the room stepped up a half-interval, like a machine pleased to be praised. Mena waited until the last white robe vanished. If you intend to speak to him, he said, meaning the Pharaoh, there is a moment between moments when he listens like a man and not like a god. At dusk he prays in a private court, the window of appearance. He pretends to show himself to the people. He shows himself to himself. Can you get me there? US asked. I can get anyone anywhere, Mena said. This city is new and thinks no one knows it yet. But floors remember footsteps faster than kings think. He touched the black disc on his staff. Tonight. US's wrist buzzed, a tiny polite knock from the bone conduction puck. 3 soft tones curled along his skin. Hana's 20-minute check-in. He pressed his wrist. I hear you. Her voice came threaded through static that felt like sand through cloth. Status? Found a machine that pretends to be a son, he murmured. Found a man who remembers. Dusk interview with a king. That sounds like a high-risk media tour, Hana said. Try not to trend. He smiled. I'll keep my hashtags analog. 2 more pulses before I hit the loud channel, she said. If you feel the pull, don't be romantic. Copy. Mena watched him without comment, a man accustomed to other people speaking to things he could not see. He turned back toward the sanctum. Do not touch it, he said, not unkindly. It does not know you. It only knows hunger and praise. I've dated worse, US said. Mena blinked, decided this was humor, and allowed himself a very short laugh. They retraced their path through the temple's veins, out into Amarna's harsh daylight. The city seemed brighter after the sanctum's controlled glow, crude in its sun-washed honesty. A gust picked up grit and made thin whirls at the edges of squares. The Aten on the pylon stared as if offended that anyone would dare leave a room where light had been properly trained. Tonight, Mena said, North Colonnade, when the last incense stick shrinks to a thumb. US nodded. Tonight. He watched Mena fold back into the crowd and disappear like a good story into a louder one. Then he stood alone on the avenue and let the city's heat hammer him until his thoughts stopped skittering and lay down. He glanced at the watch. 11:47. Always. He closed his fingers around it and felt a pulse that belonged to neither the watch nor his body. Don't make me fish you out, Hana murmured in his ear, last tone whispering away. He answered the easy way, with breath. Then he walked into the afternoon, toward a palace whose shadow fell across its own worship. Dusk made the city honest. The fierce white light softened to a copper wash. Dust in the air turned visible, as if the day had been grinding something fine between its molars and only now let you see the powder. Music wound through courtyards. A vendor shouted for the last figs. Somewhere a family laughed too loudly at a joke, happy to have found a pocket of noise the Aten hadn't yet claimed. Mena met US at the North Colonnade and moved with the quick confidence of a man who had mapped this palace with his feet. They slipped past guards whose eyes were on the horizon for a storm that would never arrive, along a corridor lined with carved lotus, then through a small court where a pool caught the sky and made it still long enough to get a good look at it. They stopped in the shadow of a high doorway. Beyond it lay the window of appearance, a shallow balcony where the pharaoh stood to let himself be adored. The space behind the window was private, a screened chamber with low benches, a table set with fruit and water, a wall painting of the royal family under Aten's rays, each ray ending in a hand pressing an ankh to a lip. In this light, the hands looked less like blessings and more like insistences. Akhenaten stood near the painting. He was taller than US expected, and thinner, the kind of thin that came from too much thinking and not enough sleep. His head was elongated, yes, but it was his eyes that held you. Fever bright, as if a sun lived behind them attempting to burn its way out. 2 guards flanked the doorway. Mena murmured something too soft to catch. The nearer guard swallowed, the farther blinked twice, and both stared intently at the opposite wall. Mena led US in and stopped at a respectful distance, staff grounded. "Great one," Mena said simply. Akhenaten turned. His face rearranged itself minutely, king's mask slipping a fraction to show a man, then said again. "You are Mena," he said, weighing the name like a coin. "A listener," Mena said. "I brought a watcher." Akhenaten's gaze fell on US. The recognition in it was unnerving, not of a person, but of a category. "You are from the place that makes straight lines out of days," he said, "the place where time is cut into coins." US bowed his head a little. "I came because you are paying for light with songs." The pharaoh's mouth twitched. "Songs are cheap." "Not the kind you ask for," US said. "You want the names that keep a country stitched together when no one is looking." Akhenaten's jaw clenched. He paced to the table, lifted a fig, put it down, picked it up again like he'd caught himself at a bad habit. "I am not a butcher," he said. "I have burned no temples. I have cut no throats. I have only asked that the mouths of my people speak one name, Aten, the sun that cannot lie. Truth doesn't need you to erase other truths," US said. Akhenaten leaned on the table with both hands, head hanging for a breath. When he looked up, the king was gone, and the man remained. He spoke lower, urgent. "He came to me in sleep," he said. "At first I thought it was exhaustion. Then I thought it was God. Now I don't know what I think, only what I feel. A pressure, like a hand at the back of my neck, urging my head forward toward this." He gestured vaguely at the painted rays. US said nothing. Sometimes you let a confession arrive on its own breath. "He showed me light that never fails," Akhenaten went on. "Rooms cool in the noon heat, lamps that burn without smoke, walls that breathe like reeds. I could build a city that is gentle on its people in a land that is not. He said I could do this if I trimmed the past, if I uncluttered the house of the gods. He said the old names were a tangle. He said," he broke off, swallowed. "He said immortality is not a trick. It is a tidy room." US looked past the pharaoh at the painting. In it, a small princess held a toy. A Ray's hand pressed an ankh to her mouth. Immortality is a crowded room, he said. It is people making noise about you after you are gone. It is the opposite of tidy. Akhenaten's laugh was brief and cracked. You speak like a priest who has lost his stipend. I speak like a man who has had a piece of himself taken, US said, before he could decide whether to say it. He trades. He will tell you it is a fair price. He will call it mercy. It is amputation. A draft kissed the back of US's neck. The lights shifted as if a thin cloud had passed over the painted Aten. A shape stood where wall had been a moment before. Not an apparition exactly. The custodian occupied the space the way a rule occupies a game, invisibly, completely, obvious only once you start keeping score. Ulric Stone, he said, and his voice made the little hairs along US's arms stand up, not with fear, but with the body's recognition of an argument about to begin. You have become familiar. Occupational hazard, US said. Akhenaten went very still, the way men go still when they realize the thing they have been explaining to themselves as metaphor has a shadow that speaks. You are the messenger. I am what keeps, the custodian said, what binds, what makes forgetting possible. You make erasure possible, US said. I make mercy possible, the custodian countered. Do you recall, Ulric, how often men have begged to forget? How many nights you have had yourself, where oblivion would be a kindness? US felt the pressure of the hole in his memory twist. He didn't look at it. Kindness is what people do for each other, he said evenly. Forgetting is what fire does to paper. The custodian turned a fraction so that the angle of his attention moved to Akhenaten. Great one, he said, and the honorific sounded like a borrowed coin. This man comes from a place of little mirrors. He believes everything can be reflected, copied, carried. He does not understand what it is to lead a people out of a swamp of stories. Akhenaten's fingers pressed white into the table's edge. I understand swamps, he said softly. I grew up in a palace built on one. Then listen, the custodian murmured. You will give me the clogged reeds, the gods in their islands, the priests in their small rooms, with their small hordes. In return, I give you wind in your halls, and cool in your heat, and light in your dark. Your people will bless you for it, and when they will die unafraid, because the room will be tidy, and nothing will be hiding in it. US took a step forward before he remembered there were guards outside, who would be obliged to notice if he became impolite. He stopped. And when you die, he said to the pharaoh, how will anyone call you back to mind? If you cut the ropes, the boat drifts, the house fills with wind and no voices. Akhenaten's eyes flicked between them, the way a man's do when two parts of his head have retained very good counsel. He closed them for a heartbeat. When he opened them, there was a crack in the zeal, and something human showed through. If I stopped, he asked the custodian, not quite daring to look at him, if I returned the old names to their walls, would the light fail? The custodian didn't answer immediately. His silence was very articulate. Finally, light changes, he said. It would dim. US said, dim is not death. The custodian's gaze returned to him, mild as a scalpel. You are fond of half measures. Men die of half measures. They also live by them, US said. Compromise is a kind of mercy, too. A soft triple buzz brushed his wrist. Hana, on schedule. The sound seemed absurd here, a thread from a future tied to an ancient wrist. He didn't touch the puck. He kept his eyes on the king. Ulric. Hana's voice breathed the barest whisper, almost not there. One ping only. I'll wait. Don't answer. He didn't. Akhenaten stood very straight, as if his spine had remembered its purpose. If I am wrong, he said to no one in the room, and to every god that had ever failed a man, may my name be spoken again in the old houses. Mena's eyes flicked to US. A breath like relief crossed his features. The custodian watched the king with a look that might have been disappointment or the restraint of it. We are not finished, the custodian said to US. Quiet, intimate, as if the room were a confessional. Your debt remains. Akhenaten turned sharply. Debt. Not yours, US said. Mine. The guards stirred outside. The moment had weighed too much on the floorboards and made them creak. Mena moved, a small gliding step that put him between US and whatever impatience stood beyond the screen. We should leave, he said. Great one. The window awaits. Akhenaten nodded once, mask closing over his face like a lid. He stepped to the balcony where the people would look up and see a god. Mena tugged US's sleeve, not unkindly. They slid into the side corridor. Breath synchronized as if they had practiced. At the end of the passage, Mena stopped by a stair that coiled downward into cool. There is a woman, he said, a servant of the old order who has learned to move in the new. She will meet you under the northern stairs at moonrise. She knows a path to the tomb beneath. There, the map of the Dream Nexus waits, if you can look without being seen. And the custodian? US asked. Mena's mouth quirked. He looks everywhere, but he prefers rooms where men think they are alone. The triple tone buzzed again, the one Hana sent, when she would not be sending a third in kindness. US exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Go, Mena said. Come back. Bring your half measures if you must. We will take them. US nodded. He touched the watch in his pocket, felt the steady lie of 11:47, and told himself that lies sometimes made good bridges. He took the stairs into the cooling dark, toward a map drawn by people who had once trusted sleep more than they trusted kings. The northern stair descended into a breath that did not belong to the desert above. The air carried not heat, but stone's patient cool, threaded with a mineral tang that made US think of wet earth, even though he knew this land had not tasted rain in months. His boots grated on steps, worn shallow by workers' sandals. The torch ahead bobbed. Its bearer was a woman wrapped in dark linen, the cloth inked with faint symbols that caught light only when the flame leaned close. She glanced back once. Her eyes shone with the hardness of someone who had spent a long time learning when not to speak. You are the one Mena named, she said softly. Depends what he named me, US answered. The corner of her mouth moved. Traveler. I've been called worse. She did not waste another word. They walked. The passage turned tight, shouldered them sideways, then opened into a chamber whose ceiling swallowed the torch's reach. Carvings smothered the walls, not of Aten's open hands, but of rivers, trees, and gods with heads of falcon, lion, crocodile. The paint was faded, but not gone. It felt less like neglect and more like something deliberately buried where the sun could not pry. The woman lifted the torch higher. When Akhenaten ordered erasure, not all obeyed. Some carved downward instead of outward. They thought the sand would protect memory. Her words stirred a prickling in US's chest. Memory. The very currency the custodian traded in. Do you believe it worked? US asked. Belief is for priests. I preserve. That is enough. She set the torch into an iron bracket, hammered into the wall. Look, the floor was etched with long grooves. When US crouched, he saw them form lines, not writing but geometry, like constellations pressed flat. Circles nested inside circles, spokes radiating to symbols he recognized. Spirals, twin bars, a jagged mouth. He touched one spiral and felt a faint vibration, as if the stone remembered what had been carved into it. The map, she said simply. Not of this city, not of this world. He breathed slow. Dream Nexus. The pattern was unmistakable. Junctions where collective dreams touched, rivers where memory pooled. He'd seen fragments scratched in margins of the Codex Somnium, but never a whole diagram. Each culture, she murmured, left a layer. Some knew they were not alone. Others only suspected. Here, they tried to draw the crossroads. US traced a finger along one spoke until it met a circle marked with the Aten symbol, but altered. The disk not radiating hands, but an open eye. He shivered. "Why show me this?" he asked. The woman looked directly at him now, flames snapping in her gaze. "Because the one who whispers to kings will burn it if he finds it. We need someone who can carry a memory without carving it in stone." His chest tightened. Carry it where? The desert outside. The tent where Hana bent over her translations. The waking world where his name still belonged to him. For now. "You think I can take this out?" "You already took one object," she said. "The stone with Aten's mark. Did you not?" US froze. He had not spoken of that to anyone in this layer. How? Her expression did not change. "Some walls are thin, even across dreams." The torch guttered as a draft slid through the chamber. A voice followed, not carried by air, but by absence. "Ulric stone," the custodian intoned. The woman's hand flew to her necklace, an amulet carved with a jackal's head. Its shadow stretched too long across the floor, like it was trying to crawl away. "You wander rooms that are not yours," the custodian said. His form was not visible, but the pressure in the chamber changed. Stone leaned inward, air thickened, torchlight bent. "You have debts unpaid." "I'm still counting," US said. His voice was steady, though his heartbeat wasn't. The custodian ignored him, turning his weight on the woman. "Keeper, you offer maps to thieves. You betray the pharaoh you serve." She stood her ground. "I serve memory. Pharaohs are temporary." A low chuckle, like sand sliding down glass. "Memory is a tomb that pretends to be a garden. I am the gardener. I prune." US felt his pulse in his teeth. The grooves on the floor shimmered faintly, like light beneath water. He remembered part one, the storm of red sand, the pull that had nearly torn him apart, and knew what would happen if the custodian claimed this room. He stepped between the woman and the voice. "You want a payment? Fine. But not this. Leave the map." Silence. Then, "Another shard of yourself, then?" The word shard stabbed sharper than he expected. He imagined himself as a mosaic, pieces fitted into an image only he could recognize, until hands started plucking tiles, one by one, leaving blank mortar. Already his brother's name was gone. What next? His father's face? The way Hana had looked the first time they cracked a code together? The woman touched his sleeve lightly. "Do not bargain," she whispered. But the custodian pressed closer. "The resonator waits. Take it from this dream, and it will shine in your world. All it costs is what you are least willing to lose, a fair price." The grooves on the floor pulsed once. For an instant, US saw them not as lines, but as pathways stretching into the dark, infinite, branching, alive. The Dream Nexus. He clenched his fist. Not tonight. He reached into his coat, pulled out the pocket watch. The lid snapped open, the hands still locked at 11:47. But when he shook it once, it gave a faint, metallic chime. The sound filled the chamber like a ripple on still water. The torch flared, shadows recoiled, and the custodian's presence wavered. Not gone, but pushed back a pace. "Defiance," the voice hissed. "You buy yourself moments, nothing more." US exhaled. "Moments are all I need." The presence ebbed, leaving the stone to breathe again. The woman sagged slightly, then straightened, jaw hard. "You are marked now," she said. "Tell me something I don't know," US muttered, snapping the watch shut. She gestured to the grooves. "Remember what you saw. Because if he comes again, this floor may be dust." US nodded, forcing himself to memorize the geometry, the spirals, the crossings. Already the lines itched behind his eyelids like an afterimage. The woman retrieved the torch and led him back toward the stair. As they climbed, the air grew warmer, drier, tinged again with desert. Behind them, the chamber exhaled one last sigh, as if relieved to be left alone. At the threshold, she paused. "Traveler, when you wake, speak my name. It will anchor what you carry." "What is it?" "Neferura." The name settled heavy in his chest. He repeated it once, tasting the syllables. Neferura. "Do not forget," she said. He almost laughed at the irony, but her eyes kept him solemn. "I'll try." Above, the first stars pricked the sky, faint against the glow of Amarna's torches. But US felt the weight of what lay below, a map the custodian wanted to erase, a debt gnawing at the edges of his mind, and a name he could not afford to lose. The temple blazed at midnight. No torches burned, yet the walls of white stone pulsed with radiance, as if the moon itself had been trapped inside. Amarna's streets had emptied hours ago, but the faithful had left offerings in clay bowls along the stair. Figs, incense, jars of honey. The air shimmered with heat, though the night above was cool. US stood before the altar, pocket watch heavy in his palm. The solar resonator hovered just beyond reach, a disk of crystal and gold mounted on a stand of obsidian. It looked like a mirror, but no reflection clung to its surface. Instead, it bled light, layers of light, concentric and living, the way tree rings tell time. Behind him, the temple doors had sealed. He was alone, or so the dream wanted him to think. "Do you understand now?" The custodian's voice shivered through the chamber. It did not echo. It folded space, came from every wall at once. US narrowed his eyes. "You keep showing me power, relics, maps, always with a price tag. What do you actually want?" The resonator brightened. For a heartbeat, US saw a figure in its glow, a tall silhouette, faceless, its head tilted in mock patience. "I tend what mortals abandon," the custodian whispered. "Your kind breeds memory as a plague, every secret hoarded, every grief embalmed. I prune, I balance. You," the voice grew colder, "you steal." US's grip on the watch tightened. "If carrying memory makes me a thief, then fine. I'll keep stealing." The floor trembled. Light spilled down the altar steps like molten glass. The resonator's rings spun faster, resonating with a low hum that rattled his bones. The custodian's voice pressed close. "Take it then. Let it feed your waking world. But one tile of your mosaic will vanish. A brother was only the first." The words twisted his gut. He remembered Rome, the moment Hannah had asked about his sibling, the fog where a name should have been. Now the custodian dangled the same threat, hungrier this time. "No deal," US said. He pulled open the watch lid. Normally it ticked faintly. Tonight it roared. The hands shivered and split like threads in a mirror, multiplying into dozens. The sound grew into a choir of bells, clashing, colliding. The resonator answered. Light flared outward in blinding waves. US staggered but planted his feet, raising the watch higher. The chamber convulsed. Caskets of sand burst through the stone floor, swirling into a storm inside the temple itself. Thousands of grains struck his skin like glass splinters. He saw shapes in the storm, hieroglyphs twisting, erased names, scraps of voices he almost knew. Then, for a single flash, he saw them all. Hundreds of memories not his own, battles on forgotten fields, lullabies sung in extinct languages, the smile of a farmer's child as the Nile flooded for harvest. Lives sealed away like stars, stuffed into jars. The custodian's hiss carried fury. You see what you cannot bear. This is what you fight to preserve? Rust? Dust? They're not yours to prune, US shouted over the gale. The storm rose higher, lifting him from the floor. His boots scraped nothing but light and sand. The resonator's glow enveloped him, searing his retinas until he thought he'd go blind. Yet he refused to close his eyes. Ulric Stone, the custodian intoned. Choose. The resonator remains in the dream, untouched, or you drag it into your world and bleed yourself dry piece by piece. He thought of Hana, of her voice pulling him back in Rome, of Neferura's warning in the tomb. He thought of the map's lines, scratching themselves into his eyelids, demanding to be remembered. He snapped the watch shut. The bells died. In that silence, his own voice was steady. I choose neither. He slammed the watch against the altar's base. The resonator screamed. Its light fractured into 1,000 shards, bursting outward like shattered glass, each fragment reflecting a different sky. One shard showed snow falling over an unknown battlefield. Another, a library stacked with books that had never been written. A third, a child blowing dust from a clay tablet. The custodian roared, not with pain, but with outrage. Fool! You opened the vault without paying the toll. Guess I'm still counting, US spat back. The storm consumed the temple. Sand roared up, a cyclone of red and gold, swallowing statues, walls, the very ceiling. For one breathless second, US hovered in the center of it all. His body pulled taut like a thread, about to snap. And then, the floor vanished. He was flung upward, out of stone, out of dream, out of everything. The roar of sand collapsed into silence. US jolted upright, breath ragged, as if he had swallowed the entire storm. Canvas walls shook around him, a tent, lit by the wavering glow of a kerosene lamp. The air was sharp with dust and sweat and something acrid, like metal after lightning. Ulric. Hana's voice snapped him into the present. She was kneeling at his side, hands pressed to his shoulders as though to anchor him in place. Her eyes searched his, frantic but focused. You were gone. You stopped breathing. He touched his chest. His shirt was damp, clinging. His heartbeat thudded too fast, too shallow. How long? Minutes, maybe more. Hana shook her head. I called your name and you didn't move. I almost... She cut herself off, lips tightening. US forced a swallow. His mouth was dry as cracked earth. He tried to stand, but something heavy tugged at his right hand. He looked down. A shard of stone, no bigger than a coin, lay in his palm. Gold-veined, polished, carved with the Aten disc, radiating a brilliance that should not have existed outside a dream. Its glow was faint now, but real, casting a tiny, steady halo on the canvas. It came with you, Hana whispered. Awe bled into fear in her voice. You carried it out. He stared at the shard. Proof, evidence, but not victory. because when he reached for a memory, the one that should have come first instinctively without effort, there was nothing. A name, a face, his brother. Gone. The realization hit like the aftershock of a quake. He staggered, clutching the cot for balance. Hana caught his arm. Ulric, what is it? He opened his mouth. Nothing came, not even fragments. He only knew that once. Someone had walked beside him, laughed with him, shaped the man he became. Now that space was hollow. Hana saw it in his eyes before he spoke. Her own gaze darkened, understanding sliding into grief. Custodian. US shut his fist around the shard until its edges bit his skin. He took it. His voice cracked. Another piece, and I didn't even see which one until it was gone. For a long moment, neither moved. Outside, the desert was hushed, a vast silence pressing against the tent like the breath of something ancient. Finally, Hana broke it. We need to stop. Ulric, if you keep stepping into his playground, you'll come back with nothing left of you. Not just memories. You. US shook his head. If I stop, he wins. Everything buried, every map burned, every life forgotten. That's worse than losing pieces of me. Her grip on his arm tightened. And what happens when there are no pieces left? He had no answer, only the shard glowing faintly between his fingers, a fragment of light humming with secrets too old for words. The tent flap shifted. A wind slid through, carrying desert chill. US turned, and for an instant, just an instant, the moon over the pyramids glared like an unblinking eye, watching, waiting. Hana followed his gaze. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's not finished with you. Not yet. US slipped the shard into his coat, the pocket where the watch always rested. He could feel both pressing together, the weight of time and the weight of stolen light, vibrating as if aware of each other. He drew a slow breath. Then neither am I. The desert answered with silence, the kind that stretched for millennia.